A broken-down BMW led a single dad and his little girl into a deal for nothing more than a meal. But when the engine roared back to life, welcome back to my channel. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. The sound of the BMW's engine coughing its last breath broke the quiet of the dusty road leading into town. It limped forward before sputtering to a dead stop right in front of a sagging wooden sign that read, "Tom's Repairs, Small Engines Only." The irony wasn't lost on the woman behind the wheel. She slammed her manicured hand against the steering wheel and groaned. The car, sleek and shiny like a predator out of place, looked ridiculous parked in front of the shabby little trailer workshop with its mismatched siding and peeling paint. Tom wiped his hands on a greasy rag, stepping out from beneath the hood of a rusty pickup he'd been tinkering on. His daughter, Lily, sat cross-legged on the steps nearby, cradling a ragged stuffed rabbit that had long since lost its ears. She glanced at the car, her wide blue eyes full of curiosity. Before looking up at her father, the woman climbed out of the BMW, her sunglasses shielding her annoyance as much as her eyes. "Great, just great," she muttered, inspecting her stalled car as though it had betrayed her personally. She turned to Tom. "You're the mechanic?" Tom's gaze flicked from the fancy car to the expensive heels clicking against the cracked pavement. He gave a small shrug. "Depends." "What's wrong with it?" "It won't start," she snapped. "And before you say anything, I don't have cash on me." But she hesitated, softening her tone just a little when she noticed Lily watching her. "If you can get this thing running, I'll buy you and your little girl a hot meal." "Deal." Lily perked up at the mention of food, her tiny hand instinctively tugging at her father's sleeve. Tom didn't miss it. She hadn't had anything decent to eat all day, and though he tried his best, there were more nights than he'd like to admit when canned soup and dialed bread were all he could put on the table. "Deal," Tom said quietly. The woman stepped aside, watching skeptically as he approached the car. He didn't grab a manual or hesitate. He just lifted the hood with a practiced motion and leaned in, his eyes narrowing as if he could hear something others couldn't. To her, it probably looked like guesswork, but to Tom, the engine spoke its language. Every rattle, every sputter was a clue. He adjusted a few connections, tightened a bolt, then ran his hand along the edge of the intake like a pianist brushing over familiar keys. Within minutes, he had the BMW humming back to life, purring so smoothly it almost sounded smug about it. The woman blinked. "You did that in 10 minutes, she said in disbelief. "I had 2 mechanics look at this last week and neither of them could figure it out." "Who are you?" Tom didn't answer right away. He simply closed the hood, wiped his hands again, and gave her a small nod. "Just a guy who knows engines," he said. But Lily couldn't hold back her pride. She hopped up and grinned at the woman. "My dad can fix anything," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Trucks, tractors, even Mr. Jenkins's old lawnmower that everybody else said was junk. He can make it work again." The woman smiled faintly at that, clearly charmed by the little girl's enthusiasm. She looked back at Tom with sharper curiosity now. "Anything, huh? You sure don't move like a backyard mechanic." "I've seen pit crews that aren't as fast as you." Tom avoided her gaze. But there was no hiding the flicker in his eyes, a shadow of a memory he didn't want to recall. For a split second, the roar of stadium crowds and the blur of racetrack lights threatened to overwhelm him. He pushed it down quickly, clenching the rag in his hand as if squeezing the past into silence. "Car's fixed," he said simply, heading away. But the woman wasn't ready to let it go. "You know, most men would have charged me a fortune for that. And yet you only asked for a meal." Tom's jaw tightened. He didn't like handouts, didn't like charity, but pride didn't fill Lily's stomach. "A meal's enough," he muttered. She studied him for a moment, her brow furrowing as though trying to solve a puzzle. There was something in the way he carried himself, quiet confidence buried under layers of weariness. Not the kind you saw in men who spent their whole lives fixing tractors on back roads, but in someone who had once stood under blinding lights with the world watching. Lily skipped to his side, tugging his arm. "Can we go, Daddy? I want pie." He looked down at her bright, eager face and managed to smile. "Yeah, kiddo. Let's go." As they climbed into the BMW, The woman still couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stumbled onto a secret far bigger than a broken-down car. And though Tom kept his silence, the purr of the engine beneath his hand stirred something long dormant inside him, something he thought he had buried forever. The diner smelled of coffee, butter, and fried onions, the kind of scent that wrapped itself around you like a warm blanket. Neon lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a nostalgic glow across the red leather booths. Lily's eyes sparkled as she dug into a plate of scrambled eggs and hash browns like she hadn't eaten in days, though in truth, it had only been since lunch. Tom sat across from her, shoulders hunched, the lines of exhaustion etched deep into his face. He toyed with his fork, but barely touched the meal in front of him. Rachel he had finally learned her name, watched him over the rim of her coffee cup. There was something about the way he moved, deliberate and measured, as though each motion was weighed before being made. He wasn't just quiet. He was guarded. That made her curious. "You don't fix cars like a small-town mechanic," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her lips curved into a knowing smile as she leaned forward, elbows on the table. That wasn't luck earlier. That was muscle memory. Precision. "I've seen pit crews take twice as long to diagnose what you did in minutes." Tom forced a polite smile, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "Picked up a few tricks over the years." "Tricks?" She echoed, raising a brow. "That was more than a trick. That was... well, it was like you were listening to the engines sing. Not many people can do that. And I'm not buying that you're just some guy in a trailer who fiddles with lawnmowers." Before Tom could answer, Lily piped up, still chewing on her food. "Daddy's the best," she said proudly, pointing her fork at Rachel like it was proof of her claim. "He can fix anything. Even when things look broken forever, he makes them work again." Rachel smiled at Lily's innocent faith, but when her eyes flicked back to Tom, they lingered. There was a flicker of pain in his expression, a fleeting shadow that crossed his face before he quickly masked it again. She knew then that she'd struck a nerve. "Where'd you learn then?" Rachel pressed softly. "Because nobody just picks up skills like that. You're hiding something, aren't you?" Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hated questions, hated eyes that lingered too long. The past was buried for a reason. Locked away behind steel doors he refused to open. His wife's laughter, the blur of racetrack lights, the roar of engines, it all clawed at him whenever he let his guard down. But most of all, he remembered the night everything ended in fire and screams, the night he lost her and with her, the man he used to be. "I learned young," he muttered finally, his tone flat. "That's all there is to it." Rachel studied him carefully. Her instincts told her there was more, far more. But she let it go for now. Just then, Lily slid out of the booth and hurried toward the counter, pointing eagerly at the glass case where pies sat in perfect slices. Tom's eyes followed her, softening instantly the way they always did when she was near. Whatever storms raged inside him, Lily was the anchor that kept him steady. Rachel seized the moment. She leaned closer across the table, her voice low. "You know, I've been around cars my whole life. Street racing, pit stops, modifications, you name it. I've seen people who thought they were good, and I've seen legends. The way you fixed that BMW, that wasn't backyard talent. That was professional. Championship level. I know I've seen you before." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a split second, his mask slipped. He gripped his coffee mug a little too tightly, his knuckles whitening. She saw it. But before he could answer, the sound of screeching tires tore through the night outside. The shriek of rubber against asphalt echoed into the diner like a warning. The front door slammed open, and a gust of cold air swept in with three men who looked like trouble from head to toe. Leather jackets, tattoos, and the kind of swagger that only came from people who believed they owned the night. Rachel. One of them barked, his voice sharp enough to make Lily freeze halfway back to the table. "Boss says that BMW better be ready for tomorrow's run. Don't tell me it's still down." Rachel stiffened, her face paling. She darted a glance at Tom, then quickly looked away. "It's fixed," she said smoothly, though her voice wavered. "It'll be ready." The men eyed Tom suspiciously. "Who's this?" one asked, nodding toward him. Just a mechanic, Rachel lied quickly. Nothing to worry about. Tom stayed silent, but his jaw clenched. He recognized the type instantly. He'd seen men like them in the underground circuit before, eckless drivers with no respect for the machine or the lives it endangered. The smell of gasoline, the roar of engines, the risk of blood on the pavement, it all came rushing back. When the men finally left, Tom leaned back. The diner's expression turned unreadable. The tension lingered in the air. He had spent years trying to escape that world, back into her booth, burying hands trembling slightly as she reached for her cup. Yet here it was again, Tom stared clawing its way back into his eyes narrowing. And sitting across from him was the woman who had just dragged him to the edge of the past he'd sworn never to revisit. The night sky stretched wide above the abandoned airstrip, a blanket of black velvet pricked with faint stars. The place smelled of gasoline and burnt rubber, sounds of revving engines echoing across the cracked concrete. Makeshift floodlights illuminated the track, casting long shadows of cars lined up like predators waiting for the kill. Crowds pressed against guardrails, their shouts rising in a chaotic mix of excitement and greed. Tom stood near the edge of the chaos, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jacket. He hadn't planned on being here. He'd promised himself long ago he'd never step foot near a race again. But Rachel had begged him with trembling words, desperation dripping from every syllable. "If I don't show up, I'm done for," she'd whispered. "They'll ruin me." And then Lily, with her wide, trusting eyes, had looked up at him and said, "Daddy, you can help her. I know you can." So here he was. Rachel paced nervously beside the BMW, chewing at her lip until it nearly bled. "I can't do this, Tom," she whispered, her hands trembling as she tried to adjust her jacket. "Those guys, they don't play fair. They'll destroy me. And if I don't race, they'll come after me anyway." Tom studied her, his face unreadable. "Then don't." She blinked. "What?" "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." He opened the driver's side door and slid into the seat, the leather molding against him like it had been waiting for him all along. His hands gripped the steering wheel, and for the first time in years, something inside him stirred an old hunger, sharp and alive. "I'll drive." Rachel's eyes widened. "You?" "No, you don't understand these men. Though you wanted help. You've got it." His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of steel. Word spread quickly. The crowd's murmurs shifted to cheers and jeers as they noticed a stranger in the BMW's driver's seat. The racers lined up, engines snarling, headlights glaring like the eyes of beasts ready to strike. No one knew who he was. To them, he was just some nobody foolish enough to step into the lion's den. But as Tom settled into the car, something deep in his muscles remembered. His pulse quickened, his breathing steadied, and the world outside began to fade. All that mattered now was the machine beneath him and the stretch of asphalt ahead. He wasn't Tom the single dad anymore. Not here. Here. He was the man he used to be, the legend the world thought had burned away in a fireball years ago. The flag girl raised her arm. Engines roared louder, vibrating through the ground, rattling bones and hearts alike. Lily watched from the sidelines, clutching her stuffed rabbit tight. Her small voice lost in the sea of shouts. The flag dropped. In an instant, the airstrip exploded with sound. Cars launched forward like bullets, tires screaming, smoke curling up in white clouds. Tom's body moved before a thought gear shift, clutch throttle all, executed with perfect precision. The BMW leapt ahead, hugging the cracked concrete as though it belonged there. The first turn came sharp and dirty. One of the other racers swerved aggressively, trying to box him out. But Tom cut inside with razor precision, brushing past the edge of disaster without flinching. The crowd roared at the boldness of it. Rachel, watching from the pit, covered her mouth in disbelief. She had thought he was good, maybe even great, but this was something else entirely. This was mastery. Lap after lap, Tom danced with the car like it was an extension of himself. Every movement was instinct, honed from years of training, victories, and heartbreak. The engine didn't just purr, sang beneath his control, responding to his touch as though the machine itself recognized him. But the street racers weren't about to let him win. On the final lap, Two cars ganged up, one flanking left, the other pressing in on the right, trying to squeeze him out. It was a dirty move, one that could flip a lesser driver. The crowd gasped as sparks flew and mirrors clipped. Tom's eyes narrowed, and then it happened, the move that would be whispered about long after. He dropped back for half a heartbeat, feinting retreat, then gunned the throttle. Weaving between the two cars so fast the crowd couldn't follow, the BMW shot forward like lightning, breaking free just in time to take the final stretch. The finish line loomed ahead, glowing under the floodlights. He crossed it first. By a mile? For a split second, silence hung in the air. Then the crowd erupted in a thunderstorm of cheers, shouts, and disbelief. People clambered over guardrails, swarming closer, their phones flashing as they filmed the unknown driver who had just blown past every champion on the strip. "That's impossible," one man whispered. "Nobody drives like that anymore." But another voice rose, trembling with awe. "No, not nobody. That was Thunderbolt Tom. I'd know that style anywhere." The name spread like fire. Shouted from mouth to mouth until the whole airstrip thundered with it. Thunderbolt Tom. Thunderbolt Tom. Thunderbolt Tom. The legend thought lost. The man they believed dead to the world was alive. Sitting in a BMW with his hands steady on the wheel, Rachel stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Lily, jumping up and down, screamed with joy, "That's my daddy." Her voice carried over the noise, and for the first time in years. Tom didn't feel the weight of shame pressing him down. He climbed out of the car, sweat glistening on his brow, the crowd surging forward. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and people stared at him like they were seeing a ghost. Tom didn't care about the crowd. He turned first to Lily, scooping her up into his arms as she laughed, clinging to him like the hero she always believed him to be. Then he glanced at Rachel, whose gratitude shone in her tearful eyes. He had spent years trying to bury the legend. But tonight the world had dug it back up. NASCAR's lost hero was no longer lost. He was found again. And this time, Tom knew he wasn't running anymore.